Hi, I'm Fida Master Livy Cherbulenko, and in this series I explore the typical mistakes of people rated anywhere between 1000 and 2000. This is a first reaction, no engine analysis of a chess.com game played between 1484 versus 1506. Let's start. Alright, so e4, c5, the Sicilian defense. Bishop c4, not the main move, but it's okay. It develops the bishop, puts pressure on f7, so it's fine. The only problem is black can play e6, and so black the diagonal for the bishop, and then the bishop is not as effective. Typically, you wanna put the bishop on c4 when black already played e5. If black already played e5, then that means that we can no longer play e6, and thus the diagonal will be be blocked. But if the pawn is still on e7, typically it's not the best idea to play bishop c4 due to e6, which restricts the bishop, and then maybe later black would even play d5 and further block the bishop. But let's see. Black chose g6, that is also fine. Okay, knight f3, developing the knight. Okay, bishop g7, putting pressure on this long diagonal. Alright. e5. Yeah, now this is, I think, a typical mistake people make at lower levels. This is too premature. It would make more sense if black had like a knight on f6, then at least like they would play like e5 with tempo, you know. Would make more sense. To play e5 when there's no yet knight on f6, when you're not yet developed, like you just have two pieces developed, king is still in the center, this knight not developed, this bishop not developed, it's too premature. Alright, you can just easily lose the pawn. Black can just play like knight c6, queen to c7, build up a pressure, and then white's just gonna lose the pawn. White should at least have the castle in place, right? That way, then we can play like rook e1, queen e2, defend the pawn. If white already castles, and black still doesn't play knight f6, then e5 might be a good move, because e5 then prevents knight f6, hinders black's development, but at the same time, then white can defend the pawn. So the rule of thumb is good to advance pawns as much as you can, but only as long as you can defend those pawns. So that's the key. You do not want to backfire. Okay. So knight to c6, putting pressure on the pawn. Queen e2. Okay. e6. Yeah, it's a bit weird. Why not queen to c7? I think queen to c7 would be a much better move. Because then how does white defend the pawn? d4 white cannot play because then black just takes. cd. How else can white defend the pawn? Right? They can't. And if white simply castles, black simply takes the pawn. Takes, and now either queen takes, offering the queen trade. When you're up material, you want to trade pieces, especially the queens, or bishop e5, attacking the h2 pawn. Either way, black is up a pawn. So I think queen c7 also move. e6 looks kind of weird. Waste of time a little bit. Okay, castles. Do you see? This gives white the precious time to castle, and so now we have rook e1, and now white is completely fine. And if I'm black, may have weak dark squares. We call this a complex of weak dark squares. If you look, black has all these pawns on light colors, this is sometimes not the best idea, because by definition, if you have too many pawns on one color, you have weak opposite complex of colors. So in this case, black has weak d6, f6, h6. Another rule of thumb, you never really play e6 and g6 together. You either play g6, but then you keep a pawn on e7 to protect d6 and f6, or you play e6, but you keep a pawn on g7 to protect f6 and h6, but never really both. There are exceptions, but most of the time you don't play both, because you weaken too many dark squares. Yeah. Okay, knight e7. Okay. Pawn to c3, so white prepares d4, strengthening his e5 pawn. Alright. d5, attacking the bishop. Interesting. Okay. So white decided to take en passant. That's one option, The downside of this, though, is that now white loses his biggest advantage, biggest asset, which is the e5 pawn. That's the biggest disadvantage. Maybe white could have played maybe I don't know, bishop b5 or bishop b3 and then d4, and thus keeping his main advantage, right? Let's say bishop, I don't know, b3, let's say black castles, d4, let's say black takes, we take. If they play queen to b6, putting pressure on the pawn, we can just play rook d1, let's say, right? And then now black has weak dark squares. And there's maybe we'll activate this knight somehow, maybe we'll play bishop e3. Oh, by the way, we can also play bishop e3, maybe even a better move, maybe the rook d1, then knight bd2, you know, then move this rook somewhere to d1 or c1 or somewhere, then this knight can go to f1, from d2 to f1, then we can play h4, remember typical idea, when black has a thin-kettled bishop, thin-kettled pawn structure, and weak dark squares, so one of the best ideas becomes h4, h5, and then h6, dominating the dark squares, right? So we go, remember our knight is on f1, so we go h4, h5, h6, bishop would go to h8, then we would go knight h2 from f1 to h2, and then knight g4, that's a common idea. And then basically our goal is to trade our dark square bishops. Like our goal would then be to play bishop g5, maybe bring the queen in, maybe queen e3, queen f4, and then bishop f6. And once we trade the bishops, remember we have a pawn on h6, once we trade the bishops, black will no longer control f6 as well, and g7. And then if they take, and we can take like with the queen, and then basically it's checkmate on g7. So that's the goal, to get a pawn to h6, then to trade the dark square bishops, and visualize the checkmate on g7 with the queen, because then there's no more bishop on h8 to protect g7 from a checkmate. Okay, so that's why I think it would have made sense to keep this pawn and then attack on the king side, like I said earlier, because ed is also a move, but now white loses his main asset. So I actually think that this is inaccurate. Okay, queen takes d6, knight a3, develops the knight might go to b5, the knight might go maybe bishop b5, and the knight might go to c4. c4 is a pretty good square because it's quite close to the center, it attacks d6, it also controls e5, so it's a pretty good square. Okay, black plays e6, a6, preventing knight b5, okay. Bishop d3, but now it's threatening knight to c4. By playing a6, black has weakened a little bit his b6 square, but I think we can just play b5 now quickly, and then we should be fine, controlling c4. Otherwise, if you don't do it now, the knight's gonna go to c4 with tempo, attack the queen, and then we're gonna play a4, securing the knight on c4. Then black cannot play b5 because we play ab, and if black plays ab, we simply win the rook on a8. But if we don't rush with b5, white could then even play a5, a4, a5, fixing the b6 square, a4, a5, disconnecting c5 from a6 and b7, disconnecting, okay. And when if black ever plays b5, white is gonna go ab en passant. And then even if black somehow takes on b6 somehow, still they will end up with an isolated a6 pawn and c5 pawn, okay. So, but black should play b5 now. This is a poor move. Poor move. I think black should have played b5, limiting the knight to a3. And then the knight, if white want to improve the knight, we have to go to c2. But you know, c2 is much worse than c4. c4 would have been much better. So I think b5 black should have played, and then maybe castle, maybe bishop b7, put a rook on d8, pressure on the d file, and have a good position. So in this case, black did not apply what's called prophylactic thinking. Always think what your opponent is up to, and if it's good for him, bad for you, think how can I prevent it. Okay, e5 is just doesn't apply any prophylaxis. Also, black has a king still in the center. You should not play in the center, waste time, and advance in the center with a king still in the center. It's too risky. You wanna keep it closed. While your king is in the center, keep it closed. Once you've castled, finished your development, then you can play in the center and advance. Otherwise, it is a white goal to play in the center, to open up a game, to attack your king while it is still in the center. So it's a mistake to advance so prematurely. So yeah. Queen e4, what is this? I mean, obviously knight c4 white should have played, the best move. Knight to c4, attacking the queen, putting pressure on the pawn. Let's say queen to c7, now we can even play a rook to e1, increasing the pressure on the pawn. Now b5 doesn't work, because we takes, queen takes, double attack on the queen and the rook, forcing the trade, and basically game over. We're up a pawn, we have better development, and we're up a pawn and no queens, which means no counterplay from black, and so white has huge advantage, white is winning. So basically, if we do not want to lose the pawn, we have to play f6. But this is so bad for black. This is so bad because it does a myriad of bad things for black. One, it blocks the bishop. Two, it weakens this h2 g8 diagonal. So the king is gonna be weaker. Maybe we move a knight eventually somewhere, bishop c4 check, right? So the king is gonna be exposed. Three, potentially it weakens these pawns. With a pawn still on f7, g6 was better protected by 2 pawns. With a pawn now on f6, g6 is only protected by 1 pawn, which allows white in the future to play maybe h4, h5, and put huge pressure on g6. So it's just so bad. And now white has, I guess, a4 white can play. Again, black cannot play b5 because just takes and rook takes 8. And also, like I said earlier, we can play a5 next, fix the pawn on b7, disconnect c5 from a6, b7, and when we ever play b5 in the future, we're just gonna take en passant, leaving black with 2 isolated pawns, a6 and c5, you know. And also because black is like so cramped and stuff, a good idea maybe might be to move a bishop somewhere here or here, and then maybe open up the center, especially if black leaves the king in the center for too long, especially then we want to play d4 quickly, you know. So yeah, this I think this would have been absolutely great for white. Instead he played queen e4. This is a very poor move. Very poor move. Yeah, bishop f5. Okay, attacking the queen makes sense. If the queen moves, then we if the queen moves, they just take the bishop. But let's see what. Yeah, this is just stupid. I mean, maybe knight c4 at least white could have tried. You know, when you bishop e4, we just take the queen of check. King moves, and then we win a piece. But of course, black can just maybe move the queen. I don't know, queen d8, let's say. And then it's still winning. But at least it's something. At least we've tried. At least we did not give up a queen. But yeah, queen f5. Of course, no comment. Yeah. Yeah, bishop f5. We'll just go quickly from here. Bam, 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 bam. Already this is not relevant. Some pawn is not relevant. Not relevant. Queen a5 attacking. F6 attacking the knight. Black just. Ooh. Queen takes e1. Yeah, nice. Nice. And basically the point is that if rook e1, then rook takes e1, checkmate. Yeah. Alright. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.